Just a moment. We shall be ready. God willing. Okay, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay. How are you this morning, Zalman?
Fine, how are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for asking. Brett, it's good to see you. I hope that means your computer is working. How are you
In the
doing?
time being, it is.
Good. Good. Joan, how are you this morning?
Fabulous, thank God. How about yourself?
Wonderful. Thank you for asking.
Good.
And Susie, how about yourself?
Doing okay, Rabbi. Thank you. I hope you're doing well too.
Thank you. Yes, thank God. Okay. Here we are. Do you see my screen?
Hmm?
Yay. At least something's working. For now. Okay. Where were we up to? Okay. Rava said that the halacha. Does anybody remember what the word halacha means?
Law.
Very good.
Law.
The halacha is not in accordance with this brisa in all of these rulings, but rather in accordance with that which was taught in another brisa. One may neither recite Shema, opposite, meaning in front of human excrement under all circumstances,
Oh, God.
nor opposite pig excrement, nor opposite dog excrement into which skins had been placed for tanning. But any other materials do not defile the venue of prayer, and it'll depend on the smell.
I hear you.
So
Okay.
sheep and cattle excrement is acceptable?
If you don't smell it.
She, those days were she.
So we actually had a real story when so as kids, we used to go out to farm stays. That's what we would do for holidays. And it would happen often. We were driving and we would stop along the way for prayers, the afternoon prayers, the evening prayers. So we'd stop at a rest stop, and right off of the rest stop was fields and farms and animals. And I remember vividly my father was never scared to go over and feed the cows or horses or whatever would come over, but it would smell. So there was much legal debate among us siblings as to, are we supposed to face east towards the smell, or are we supposed to face away from the smell? What happens if we're on the other side of our car, so the car is a fence between us and the smell? It was very lively debates. Because if you're right by a sheep farm, yeah, it's gonna smell. So they raised the dilemma before Rav Sheshes. What is the legal status of a foul odor that has no visible source? For example, flatulence. Are you allowed to say Shema? Because that odor has no source. Not that it doesn't have a source, but that there's nothing foul in front of you that's creating that. He said to them, come and see these mats in the study hall. Come look at the yeshiva. These students are sleeping on the mats on the side. The other students are studying, and they're not concerned about foul odor. However, this applies only to Torah study because there is no alternative, but not to the reciting of Shema. For Shema, it's not appropriate to recite Shema in the presence of the odor of flatulence. And with regard to Torah study, we said that it is permitted only when the odor originated with another. But when it originated with himself, he would have to pause his Torah study until the smell goes away.
Rabbi,
Mm-hmm.
why dogs? I mean, pigs, obviously, it's not kosher, but why dogs?
Aha. So the reason for pigs is actually not because it's not kosher. The reason for pig excrement is because pigs eat all the garbage and their feces smell horribly. And dogs, he said, only dog excrement, not regular dog excrement, but dog excrement that was used to tan hides. Apparently the mixture of the dog excrement and the hides creates a extremely foul odor.
Dog excrement was used to tan, like cowhides?
I guess.
Okay.
Let's see if that was ever done. Let's pause a second.
Well, I know that tanneries were supposed to really smell terrible.
Correct.
Oh.
Dog poop used in tanning, says Google. Okay, we'll get back to it soon. Oh, no, it's loading already now. Is it loading? Almost loading. We'll see later if it loaded. Okay. It was stated that the sages disagreed over a parallel issue. What is the law with regard to feces passing before him, even being moved from place to place? Let's say there's a porta potty. Porta potties don't really smell and they're in their own enclosed box. But let's say there's a chamber pot that's being moved and being taken outside. Abaye stated one is permitted to recite the Shema opposite, while Rava said one is forbidden to recite Shema opposite. So what's the reasoning here? Abaye said, from where do I say this halacha that it is permitted to recite Shema in front of feces that are moving? I say this basis on of what we learned in the Mishnah. One who is afflicted with biblical leprosy. This is not the same leprosy that we have today. This is a spiritual kind of affliction, a lesion which appeared on the body because of certain spiritual blemishes. For example, gossip, haughtiness, and slander, things like that. Renders the area beneath any covering under which he is located ritually impure. In other words, if you're underneath a tent, a canopy, or inside a house, together with the person who is the leper himself is impure, and anyone who's underneath the same roof as him is impure. In a case where the ritually impure leper is standing under the branches of a tree, and a ritually pure person passes under the branches of that same tree, the pure person is rendered impure as the entire area of that covering is impure. So you have the impure person, the leper, standing underneath a tree. So anyone who passes underneath that tree is going to become impure. However, if the pure person is standing under the tree and the impure leper passes, he remains pure. And if the leper stopped under the tree, the pure person is immediately rendered impure. And the same is true with regard to a stone that's afflicted with biblical leprosy, in that if it is merely being moved from place to place, it does not cause impurity. The upshot is that the impurity is only disseminated in all directions when the source of impurity is stationary. So we see from here that something that's moving doesn't render everything else around it impure, and therefore the same thing, if the chamber pot or the species are moving, then it's not enough to cause a person that he has to stop saying Shema. And Rava said to you that it's different. There, in the case of leprosy, it is contingent upon the permanence of the place. As with regard to the leper, it is written, he shall dwell alone. Outside the camp shall his dwelling be. His impurity is in his permanent dwelling place. In other words, by the leper, there's special rules about what's considered pure and impure, and what is governed by purity and impurity, that him standing in a place renders the place impure. But here, with regard to the obligation to distance oneself from something repulsive, the Torah stated the principle, and your camp shall be holy, and there is no holiness in those circumstances. If it smells, it smells. Doesn't matter whether it's stationary or whether it's moving. It is not appropriate to say Shema while there is feces passing in front of you. On this topic, Rav Papa said the mouth of a pig is like passing feces. The Gemara asked, that is obvious. He's eating it. Could even have feces in his mouth. The Gemara replies, no. This halacha is only necessary to teach that even though the pig emerged from the river, and one might assume that its mouth was thereby cleansed, it never becomes completely clean. But even if you have a pig that just came out of a bath, you're still not allowed to say Shema while it's in front of you. Now, what happens if you don't know whether there's feces there or not? Or whether there's something there and you don't know what it is. In other words, feces, we already said, human feces, dog feces, even if it doesn't smell, you have to move 4 cubits away, about 6 feet. What happens if you don't know what it is? Rabbi Yehuda said if there is uncertainty as to the presence of feces, for example, whether something is or is not feces, and therefore whether or not one is permitted to utter sacred matters in its presence, it is prohibited to do so. So even if there's a possibility that there's feces here, you're not allowed to pray. However, if there is uncertainty as to the presence of urine, at that point it is permitted to do so. Some say an alternative version of this. Rabbi Yehuda said, if there is uncertainty as to the presence of feces in the home, one may assume that there is no feces present, and it is permitted to speak sacred matters. But if there's doubt as to the presence of feces in the dung heap, it is forbidden to do so. If there is uncertainty as to the presence of urine, however, even in the dung heap, it is permitted to do so. So the dung heap, of course, we're talking about a place where we don't know whether there's dung there or not. It was recently cleaned up. We don't know if there is dung there or not. And he holds in accordance with that which Rav Amnuna said. As Rav Amnuna said, the Torah prohibited the utterance of sacred matters only opposite the stream of urine. But if it's already soaked into the floor, that would not be an issue. And in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yonatan, as Rabbi Yonatan raised the contradiction between two verses. On the one hand, it is written, you shall also have a place outside the camp to which you will go. Meaning that one must exit the camp before attending to his bodily needs, but there is no obligation to cover it. You just have to leave the camp, relieve yourself, and come back. And it is written in another verse, the following verse, and you shall have a spade among your weapons. And when you ease yourself outside, you shall dig with it and turn back and cover your excrement, indicating a clear obligation to conceal one's excrement. So, do you have to just be outside the camp or do you have to cover it? So he resolves the contradiction. How is this resolved? Here, where one is required to conceal his bodily needs, it refers to feces. Here, where there is no requirement to conceal his bodily needs, it refers to urine. Consequently, with regard to urine, reciting Shema is only prohibited by Torah law opposite the stream of urine, but once it has fallen to the ground, it is permitted. And the sages are those who issued a decree with regard to urine. They are allowed to pray if there's urine there, even if it's in the carpet. And when they issued a decree or in the earth, and when they issued the decree, it was only in the case of their certain presence. But in case of their uncertain presence, they did not issue a decree. So what happens while it is there? At what point does it go from being there to being not there? The Gemara asks, in the case where we know that there's urine there, until and in what state does its presence preclude one from uttering sacred matters? Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, as long as it is wet enough to moisten the hands of one who touches it. And so too Rabbi Bar Chana said that Rabbi Yochanan said, as long as it moistened. And so too Ula said, as long as it moistened. In other words, it has to be wet enough that if somebody would, God forbid, touch it, their hands would become wet. Geneva said, in the name of Rav, it is forbidden as long as its mark is apparent on the ground, even though it's already dry, but so long as you can still see the outline, the darkness of where it used to be wet, that is still not appropriate to pray there. Rav Yosef said, may God his master forgive Geneva, as Rav could have never said such a thing. How could Rav never have said such a thing? Because now, in the case of feces, Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, according to Rav, when it comes to feces, once its surface has dried sufficiently to form a crust, one is permitted to utter sacred matters opposite it. So once it started to dry up, already it's not considered feces, and you can say Shema, you can pray opposite this turd. Is it necessary to say that opposite urine it is permitted once it dries? If feces are permitted once they dry, then urine for sure would be permitted once they dry. So Rav could never have said that urine will make a problem so long as its mark is apparent on the ground.
What time?
Abaya said to him, what did you see that led you to rely on that halacha and to look for that as a proof? We have another statement in the name of Rav. Rely on this halacha, as Rabbi Bar Rav Huna said that Rav said, uttering sacred matters opposite feces, even if it is as dry as earthenware, is prohibited. Even if it's very, very dry, according to Rav, as being quoted by Rabbi Bar Rav Huna, he says that you're not allowed to utter sacred matters opposite feces, even if it's as dry as earthenware. What does it mean as dry as earthenware? The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of feces like earthenware? Rabbi Bar Chana said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, as long as one throws it and it will not crumble, it is still considered moist. And some say as long as one can roll it from place to place and it does not crumble, it's considered moist. But if you throw it and it'll smash, or if you roll it and it'll smash and fall apart, that is considered like earthenware. Ravina said a story. I was standing before Rav Yehuda of Difti when he saw feces. He said to me, examine it and see whether or not its surface has dried sufficiently to form a crust. Some say that he said to him as follows, examine it and see if it is cracked, as only then is it considered dry. This reminds me of the story, the student and the professor were going for a walk, and they're both in their fancy suits and ties, and the professor sees something on the floor. He looks at it, he says, it looks like a turd. He bends over and smells it. He says, it smells like a turd. He takes from a little bit on his finger. He says, it tastes like a turd. Sure, good thing I didn't step in it.
Boo. God.
Sorry.
Oh,
That
Right.
comes to mind when we're talking about examining the turds to see if they're formed
Gross.
crust. Yes, indeed. Today, we're lucky. We don't have such issues. But back in the olden days, where there were animals all around, and there were people all around, and there was not so many bathrooms, this was a real issue.
Is there a good time? Is there a prayer and phrase of modern plumbing?
Is there a special prayer that we make for modern plumbing?
And if there isn't, there should be.
There is a special prayer that we make when we come out of the bath. There's a special prayer that we make when we come out of the bathroom.
Unbelievable.
Amazing anyone ever lived past the age of 20.
Sorry?
I said it's amazing anyone actually lived past the age of 20 in those days.
Right?
Amazing the human race didn't
Oh.
die out.
No way.
Yeah. Okay. So now, since several opinions were expressed on the subject, we had all these different opinions, both about feces and about urine. So what halachic conclusion was reached about this? It was stated that the halacha is subject to dispute. Reciting sacred matters opposite feces as dry as earthenware. Ameimer said it is prohibited. Amar Zutra said it is permitted. And Rava said that the halacha is opposite feces as dry as earthenware. It is prohibited. If there's feces, even if they are as dry as earthenware, it is prohibited. And opposite urine, it is prohibited as long as it moistens, but once it's dry, you may pray opposite it. The Gemara raises an objection, right? We just had the final halacha, and now we have an objection. An objection to the final halacha. based on what was taught in a brisa, urine, as long as it moistens, is prohibited. If it was absorbed into the ground or it dried in its place, it is permitted. What? What is urine that was absorbed not similar to urine that dried? Why does it say whether it was absorbed into the ground or whether it dried in its place? So he explains that just as when it dries, its mark is no longer apparent, so too when it absorbed, its mark is no longer apparent and then is permissible. So we see from this brisa that when its mark is apparent, it is prohibited, even though it's no longer moistening, even though it's no longer moist and can no longer make anything moist. So the Gemara raises a difficulty to counter this. And according to your reasoning, that's funny. I thought that we're going very fast today because my computer still says 10:39. And then I looked at my phone and it says 10:59. So my
Right.
computer's having a fun day today. I almost went an hour overtime. The Gemara raises a difficulty to counter this. And according to your reasoning, say the first clause, as long as it is moistens, it is prohibited. From which one can infer, but if it does not moisten anymore, but its mark is apparent, it is permitted. Rather, no inference beyond its basic meaning can be deduced from this brisa because the inferences would be contradictory. The Gemara notes, let us say that this is a parallel to a dispute between the Tanaim. Does anyone want to remind us who were the Tanaim? The Tanaim were the authors or the sages in the times of the Mishnah. The Tanaim are the authors of the statements, or I should say the sayers of the statements that are brought down in the Mishnahs and in the Brisas. As it was taught in the Brisa, it is forbidden to recite Shema opposite a vessel from which urine was poured. So this actually happens sometimes when we're called to the hospital for people who are sick. Sometimes it happens that the person has a catheter. Person has a catheter, there'll be urine in there. So I've been told that we're not supposed to put on tefillin with someone who has a catheter. If there's a, what are those urine jugs called? A bedpan?
Yeah, well, I don't know if they have a particular name.
A bedpan or a urine jug, right? So that's what we're talking about over here. If there's a bedpan or a urine jug, which the urine was poured out of. So opposite such a vessel, it is forbidden to recite the Shema. However, the urine itself that was poured, if it was absorbed into the ground, it is permitted. And if it was not absorbed, it is prohibited to say the Shema in front of it. Rabbi Yossi disagrees and says it is only prohibited as long as it moistens. So the Gemara wants to clarify the dispute. What is the meaning of absorbed and not absorbed in what the first Tana says? If you say that absorbed means that it does not moisten, and not absorbed means that it does moisten, so then Rabbi Yossi came to say that as long as it moistens, it is prohibited. But if there's no moisture but its mark is apparent, it is permitted. So then, if so, that is identical to the first opinion, the opinion of the first Tana, and there's no dispute. Rather, we must say that absorbed means that its mark is no longer apparent. Not absorbed means that its mark is apparent. And Rabbi Yossi came to say that as long as it moistens, it's prohibited, but if there is no moisture, it is permitted even if the mark is apparent. In which case, the dispute of our Gemara is parallel to this Tanaitic dispute.
So in a hospital, the jug urine that we pee in is hanging next to the bed, off the bed. Can the patient say Shema? Shema?
It's a good question, and I would say it depends whether it's reused or whether it's new. I feel like usually they just dump the whole thing in a biohazard bag and take a new one.
No, I mean,
No.
I'm talking about when you're in bed. Have you ever been in a hospital bed, Rabbi?
So you're saying when if the urine thingy is right there and it has
It's
urine
full.
inside it.
Yeah, and it's hanging, and you use it to pee when you're in the bed, pee into the jug, and you close the jug, and it's hanging on the rail of the bed.
Right. So as of now, where we're holding so far, yes, it would seem that it would be prohibited to say Shema.
That's terrible. That's
Yeah.
terrible. That's terrible because if the person's sick and say the jug is emptied, you would
Well,
think
even
the
if it's
person.
not empty.
Oh, you know what? Let me tell you a story. Can I tell you guys a story?
Okay.
Of course.
Wonderful. There were two brothers, very holy brothers. Their name was Rabbi Zusha of Anipali and Rabbi Elimelech of Lizhensk. They lived in the early 1700s. So about 300 years ago. Between 250, 300 years ago. They were students of the Baal Shem Tov, and they were very holy Jews. In those days, the government didn't like very holy Jews and did like to put holy Jews in jail. So one day, they, for whatever reason, these two brothers were taken to jail. So they're sitting there and they're about to start their morning prayers. And then one of the brothers said to the other, "Oh no, look, there's a chamber pot in the corner." Right? They weren't allowed, the inmates were not allowed to go out to use the restroom. They used the restroom in the corner of the room, and when they were done, when it was full, it would be taken out and cleaned. So one of the brothers says to the other, I forget which one it was, said to the other, he says, "What are we gonna do?" He starts crying. So he's sitting there crying because, like Joan was saying, what? It's bad enough that I'm in jail. I'm not even allowed to pray. And he was very upset. The other brother looked at him and said, "Why are you crying?" He said, "Because we can't pray. It's the chamber pot is there." And the brother said to him, "You silly guy. The same God who told us to pray told us that when there's a chamber pot, we're not allowed to pray. Every day we do the mitzvah to pray, but when's the last time that we got the opportunity to have a mitzvah of not praying? We never got to fulfill this mitzvah of not praying when there's a chamber pot." And the brother said, "You know what? You're right. This is so exciting. This is our first time that we're able to do this mitzvah and we're able to serve God by not praying. Wow, we've never had the opportunity to do that before." And they start singing and dancing over the opportunity to serve God. Now,
Yeah.
these
Well,
drunk
if
peasants
you're in a
sorry?
if you're in a hospital bed sick and there for days and days and days and days, you're not going to be thrilled that you can't pray because of the urine bottle.
One second, let me finish the story. Let me finish the story.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Then we'll talk about the practical application. So they start singing and dancing. Meanwhile, all the peasants, they are in there for whatever they're in the jail for, but they don't know why these brothers are singing. So they just join along, right? If people are singing and dancing, why not? Let them be crazy, but let us be crazy too. So they all join in the singing and the dancing, and the guard hears that there's a commotion coming from the cell. He comes by and he sees that there's all these people, they're singing and they're dancing. What kind of a joy is going on over here? So the guard says to one of the inmates, "What are they dancing about?" He says, I don't know, but from time to time they point at the chamber pot, so I guess it has something to do with that. The guard says, the chamber pot is what's making them happy. I'm going to take it away.
Uh-huh.
On a practical note, if someone is stuck in the hospital bed, I'm sure there are ways to either have a nurse move the bedpan or other such ways, and if not, then speak to your rabbi to do more research to figure out if there's a way that you can pray.
You can say that the urine bottle is sealed, so except, which is the same thing as being buried.
That's a good question. Is being sealed the same as being buried? I think that we're going to get more into this later when we talk about chamber pots, if they're open or if they're closed. But it's a good point. Or better yet, let us pray that none of us end up in the hospital. None of us, none of our loved ones.
Right. Amen. Oh my.
Okay.
I wonder if Jeffrey wasn't praying.
The Gemara states that it is not necessarily parallel. No. Everyone, both Tanaim, agree that as long as it moistens, it is prohibited. And if there is no moisture, but the mark is still apparent, it is permitted. So what is the argument? Round of applause. We have finished page 25a. On to 25b as soon as this will load. And here the difference between them is in a case where it is moist enough to moisten other things. According to the first Tana, the prohibition is only in effect when the urine is moist enough to moisten something else. While according to Rabbi Yossi, it applies as long as the urine itself is moist, even if it is not moist enough to moisten other objects. Okay. And with this, we conclude our conversation for the current time, for the time being. What's the time now? 11:10. Okay. We learned in the Mishnah, now we're going back to our Mishnah. If somebody who descended to immerse themselves in the mikveh in the morning due to a seminal emission has to make a calculation whether or not he is able to ascend, cover himself with a garment, and recite the morning Shema before sunrise. And we said if he is able to come out and get dressed in time to say Shema before sunrise, let him come out and get dressed. But if not, better he should cover himself in the water and say Shema like that with the water covering him. The Gemara asks, let us say that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi taught in this unattributed Mishnah. In other words, in the Mishnah itself, it doesn't say whose opinion this is. So what Gemara is going to try and figure out who is the author of this statement. Maybe it's in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said, one may recite Shema until sunrise. And once sunrise comes, it's already too late to say Shema. Therefore, this guy has to calculate whether he can get out in time or not. Because according to the other opinions, who cares that it's sunrise? Come out after sunrise and make the blessings after sunrise. The Gemara immediately rejects this assumption. No. You can even say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, who disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer and holds that one may recite the morning Shema until the third hour of the day. And perhaps the halacha in our Mishnah is directed toward those whose practice was in accordance with the custom of the Vasikin, the pious individuals who were scrupulous in their performance of the mitzvah. With regard to Rabbi Yochanan said, even if you agree that the mitzvah of saying Shema goes until the third hour of the day, which in a day where sunrise and sunset are both 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., would be until 9 o'clock. The Vasikin, who were pious individuals that were scrupulous in their performance of the mitzvahs, would conclude the reciting of Shema with sunrise. So even though you could say it after, the best way to say Shema is at the time of sunrise. Therefore, this person who wants to get out of the mikveh in order to recite Shema should see whether it's sunrise or not. We learned in the Mishnah, and let me ask you this, maybe we could figure this out. What did we learn recently, maybe last week or the week before, about sleeping in bed without pajamas that would seemingly contradict what we learned over here, that a person can cover themselves in the water and say Shema?
Well, if you're covered with if you're in bed and you're covered with the covers, the blankets, then you're covered.
Right. And over here, we're talking about the mikveh water, right? You're in a pool of water.
And so you can say the water covers you as long as you're up to like your neck.
Aha. So the water is covering you until you're up to your neck. Now, the problem is that, very good, Zalman, but the problem is that the terminology that we used is that your heart sees your nakedness. Underwater, can your heart see your nakedness?
Yes, assuming the water is clear.
Ah, okay, very good. That's going to be the distinction. We learned in the Mishnah, and if one calculates that he will not be able to ascend and cover himself with a garment in time to recite the Shema, he should cover himself in the water and recite Shema there. The Gemara asks, how can one say Shema with his head above the water? His heart sees his nakedness because there's no barrier between them. Regarding this, Rabbi Elazar said, and some say it was Rabbi Acha bar Abba, bar Acha in the name of Rabbeinu, which is Rav. This was taught with regard to murky water, which is considered to be like solid earth for certain. Therefore, it constitutes a barrier so that his heart does not see his nakedness.
Isn't a mikvah clear though? I mean,
sorry,
the mikvah, the ritual bath.
Correct. It is supposed to be. It is supposed to be clear, but it depends. Meaning, technically, you could go to the mikveh in so long as it's coming from a natural source. A river can be used as a mikveh. The ocean can be used as a mikveh.
The ocean itself. Okay, well, yeah. And the ocean isn't always clear.
Right. So let's read the next paragraph, and we'll finish with that. On the same topic, the sages taught in a brayso, if one was in clear water, he should sit up to it in his neck and recite Shema. And some say he should sully the water with his foot. Dig around in the dirt underneath till it becomes murky, and then say the Shema. Today, in the modern mikvahs that we have, it's all like a beautiful spa, and there's no water, there's no dirt in it, and the mikvah water is very clean and clear. With that, we will pause today's session, even though my computer still says it's 10:39. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Zalman. Have a wonderful day. Bela, Esther, Joan, Susie. Have a wonderful day. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Joan and Susie, we missed you last week, Wednesday.
Yeah, well, we had something. What happened this week?
I know we had something to do.
Let me tell you what this week's class is going to be about.
Anything other than feces.
We were doing that, yeah.
Tomorrow's. Sorry?
I said anything other than feces.
Yeah, exactly,
Really?
right? The snake that swallowed Moses. What did Moses do to deserve this, and how did a woman save the day again? Be there or be square, 11 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Very good. Oh, okay.
Thank you.